I'm Jessica Monroe, 34 years old, and the last thing I remember before everything changed was the cold tile of a hospital floor against my cheek. I was still in my scrubs, stitches tight along my side, when my father stormed into the room and told me, "Pay rent or get out." I barely had the strength to whisper, but I said no. His hand came down hard across my face before I could brace for it. My body folded sideways off the bed ribs, screaming, blood filling my mouth. He stood over me like I wasn't his daughter. And that's when something broke, not in my bones, but somewhere deeper. Before I go any further, let me know where you're listening from in the comments, and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to start over with nothing but your own two hands. 3 months earlier, I moved back into my dad's house. I didn't want to. I had a small apartment, steady hours at the clinic, and enough saved up to scrape by. But then the clinic cut my shifts, and the landlord raised the rent again. My daughter Danny was 6, just a kid who needed a roof and a warm bed. I told myself it was temporary, just until I caught up. My dad made it sound reasonable when I first called, said he had a spare room, said we'd figure it out. But I should have known. He'd always believed that if you needed help, you owed him for life. From the moment I unpacked that suitcase, I felt the weight of it. The walls were thin, the ceiling stained, and the window frame never quite shut. He didn't say much, but every glance reminded me that kindness came with a cost. At first, it was small things, groceries, gas money, resetting the Wi-Fi. He said it was because I used it the most. I didn't argue. I skipped my own dentist appointment so I could cover the cable bill. I paid without a word because that's what I'd always been taught: keep the peace, especially when a child's watching. My younger brother Eric still lived at home too. No job, no plans, just hours of video games and half-finished takeout. Dad called it a rough patch, said Eric was going through something that he'd bounce back. But in the meantime, he had no problem using my credit card to order dinner. Said his account was frozen, said it was temporary. They never asked. They expected. Dad's voice would drop into that low, heavy tone, the one that used to make me freeze up as a kid. Family helps family, he'd say. But what he meant was, you owe us. Danny picked up on it faster than I expected. She stopped singing around the house, clung to her stuffed bunny more often. One night she asked me if Grandpa was mad at her too. I waited until she was asleep before I let myself cry. I buried my face in the pillow so she wouldn't hear. The week before the hospital, things got worse. Eric ran up another credit card bill, this time from some crypto mentorship program. Dad didn't hesitate, told me I needed to cover it, said I was working double shifts, now I could afford it. I told him I was saving for Danny's inhaler refill. He looked at me and asked, "What's more important, her lungs or your brother's future?" That's when I started to understand how far gone things were. I didn't fight back. Not then. But the night of the accident, I was driving home after an overnight shift. Rain on the windshield wipers, barely keeping up. I blinked too long at a red light. Didn't see the truck coming across the intersection until it was too late. When I woke up, I was on a stretcher. My ribs were stitched. My wrist was in a brace. They told me I was lucky. I didn't feel lucky. The next morning he showed up. No flowers, no concern, no mention of Danny. Just those same words like a hammer to the chest. Pay rent or get out. That slap, that was the last thing he took from me. And what came next, that was the part he never saw coming. By the time I got back from the hospital, the bruise on my ribs had turned dark and deep. Every breath reminded me where I'd been. My wrist was wrapped and the stitches itched under the bandage, but nothing stung as much as walking back through that front door into a house where the man who hit me still sat at the kitchen table like nothing had happened. Dad didn't look up when I came in, just stirred his coffee and asked if I remembered to pay the utilities. "Your room uses more heat," he said, "and that kid of yours leaves every light on in the house." I nodded. I didn't trust my voice to do anything else. That night, I sat by Danny's bed while she slept. The nightlight cast a warm ring on her pillow. Her little arm curled around Bunny, the one with the fraying ears. I reached out and traced the faint scar on her cheek. She'd fallen at the playground a few weeks earlier. I remembered how hard I cried that day, how scared I was that she might be in pain. Now here I was, sore and bruised, and no one in this house even asked if I was okay. The next morning, a letter was slipped under my door. Not handwritten, printed, formal. It read, "Effective immediately, rent will increase by $200 per month due to additional strain on household income. Payment expected by Friday. Signed House Management, G. Monroe." I stared at the paper for a long time before I laughed. Not because it was funny, because if I didn't laugh, I knew I'd start screaming. I sent Dad a text asking if it was some kind of joke. His reply came almost instantly. "You live under my roof. You pay what I say. That's how adulthood works." 2 days later, Eric knocked on my door. He didn't make eye contact, just leaned on the frame and said, "Hey, Dad said you'd help cover my car insurance this month." I blinked at him. "Your car hasn't moved in weeks." He shrugged. "Still got to keep it running." It was like I was their personal bank, except no one ever checked the balance. Even Danny was starting to see through it. One night as we were brushing teeth, she looked up at me and asked, "Why does Grandpa only talk nice when you give him money?" I didn't know what to say. My throat closed up before I could find the words. The next day, Megan stopped by. She'd been my closest friend since nursing school. We hadn't talked much lately. I'd been too tired, too overwhelmed, but when she walked in with a grocery bag and a soft blanket folded over her arm, something in me cracked. She hugged me and asked why I hadn't been answering her calls. I tried to say I was fine, but the words wouldn't hold. The tears came before I could stop them. We sat at the kitchen table, and I told her everything. The rent, the slap, Eric's demands. She listened without interrupting. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out a small brass key. "Your mom gave this to me before she passed," she said quietly. "Told me to hold on to it until things got bad." I think now might be the time. I stared at the key. It was old-worn with a tiny letter M etched near the base. I turned it over in my hand, trying to remember if I'd ever seen it before. That night, I lay in bed, the key resting in my palm. Danny had curled up beside me, fast asleep, her little body pressed against mine like she knew I needed the closeness. The house creaked in the quiet wind, rattling the loose pane in the window. I stayed awake for hours thinking about my mom, about what she might have meant. She'd been gone 3 years, ovarian cancer. It happened fast. She and Dad had been divorced for years, before that no real contact. She lived simply quietly in the same small house her father had left her. I hadn't been back there since the funeral. The next morning, I packed a thermos of tea, dropped Danny off at school, and drove out to the house on the corner of Ash and Hamilton. The porch was still tilted slightly. Wind chimes hung near the door, the same ones I remembered from summers when I was little. The air smelled like dry leaves and old lavender. Inside, the house was still. Faded curtains, a few pieces of worn furniture, my mom's old rocking chair with a half-finished quilt resting on the arm. It looked like she'd just stepped out for groceries and never returned. I walked room to room, quiet, careful. Nothing felt secret, until I opened the closet in her bedroom. At the back was a metal filing cabinet. I remembered it from childhood, always locked, always off limits. I pulled the brass key from my coat pocket and slid it into the top drawer. It turned with a soft click. The drawer rolled open, revealing neat rows of labeled folders. I flipped through them. Property, East Oak Bank, trust account letters to Jay. I pulled out the last folder. Inside were 3 things. The first was a notarized letter naming me as the sole beneficiary of her father's estate. The second was a deed for the very house we were living in. The house Dad had claimed was his. The third was a handwritten note. If you're reading this, it means you've endured far more than I ever wanted for you. They will take until there's nothing left. This house is yours now. Use it. Protect Danny. And never let guilt be the leash that binds you. Love, Mom. I sank to the floor, the letter still in my hands. My chest was tight. The papers were real, legal, stamped and signed. The house wasn't his. It was mine. I didn't go back that night. Megan offered her guest room, and Danny was thrilled to have a sleepover with her godmother. I slept better than I had in months. When I woke up the next morning, the fog had lifted. I didn't know exactly what the next steps would be, but I knew the direction. I wasn't going to ask anymore. I was going to act. When I stepped back into the house that morning, the weight in the air hadn't changed. My father was at the kitchen table, scribbling numbers on a napkin like always, probably bills or some new version of his so-called household budget. Eric was on the couch, gaming headset on cereal bowl balanced on his stomach, as if nothing in the world could touch him. Neither of them looked up when I walked in. "Where were you?" Dad asked after a moment, eyes still down. "I stayed at Megan's with Danny," I said. He scoffed, barely pausing. "You don't just walk out of someone else's house like that without telling them." I didn't answer. Not yet. That week I started collecting things quietly. I went through my email and downloaded every digital receipt I could find, utilities, rent transfers, grocery orders. I took photos of the bills stuck to the fridge, the ones with my name on them. I scrolled through my Venmo history and saved screenshots of the payments I'd sent Eric, each one with some flippant caption, "Thanks, sis," or "Much love from the golden child." I labeled everything and backed it up on a small external drive. I kept it in my sock drawer under a pair of rolled-up thermals. At night, once Danny was asleep, I'd sit with a cup of tea and go through everything again. Each file I added made things clearer. Megan helped me file a records request with the county clerk. It didn't take long to confirm what I already knew. The deed listed my name alone, no co-owner, no mortgage, just the trust from my grandfather passed through my mother, signed and sealed before she died. The house my father called his, it was mine. I didn't say a word. Not yet. Then came the moment that pushed everything over. It was a Tuesday evening. I had just gotten home from a short shift at the clinic. Still sore, still moving carefully but healing. I dropped my bag by the door and peeked into Danny's room. She was sitting on the edge of her bed, her back hunched slightly, running her fingers over Bunny's ears. When she looked up at me, her eyes were cloudy. "Grandpa said if I keep leaving the lights on, we might not have a place to stay," she whispered. I walked over and sat beside her, brushing her hair gently from her face. "This is our home," I told her. "No one can take it away from us." She didn't say anything, just leaned a little closer, Bunny tucked under her chin. That night after she fell asleep, I sat in the living room and turned on the front-facing camera on my phone. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I just said everything clearly: what happened in the hospital, the rent increases, the slap, the emotional weight, the demands. I kept it steady. I wanted something to exist in case anyone ever questioned what had happened here. I added video clips, Eric talking on his live stream about how he didn't have to pay anything, because I handled it all his tone casual, like it was a joke. I saved it all to the same drive, labeled the file for Danny, just in case. 2 days later, I called the same attorney who'd helped me after Mom passed. His name was Adam. I trusted him. I told him everything. Walked him through the paperwork, the trust, the abuse. He didn't hesitate. "You can file for eviction," he said, "and if you want a protection order, too." I took a breath and set the documents down on his desk. My hand trembled once, then steadied. "For the record," I said, "this isn't about revenge." He looked at me. "Then what is it about?" I met his eyes. I'm just done paying for silence. Saturday came quiet. The sky was still dark when I got up. Danny had fallen asleep on the couch the night before after a movie. She was curled under her blanket arm, wrapped around Bunny, breathing softly. I brewed a pot of coffee, let the sound of it filling the kitchen steady my nerves. Dad walked in, rubbing his jaw. His tone was dry. "Where's the rent?" I set my mug down on the counter. "I'm not paying rent anymore." He turned to look at me, slow and careful. "What did you say?" I looked him in the eye. I said no. Again. He gave a short laugh. "Is this about the hospital? You think I owe you something because you got into an accident? If it weren't for this roof." "You mean the roof I own?" That was the first moment he flinched. Not outwardly, but his eyes shifted. Just for a second. Then his voice rose. "You ungrateful." I opened the folder I'd been holding, laid out the deed, the trust, the tax filings, every page in my name. Eric wandered in behind him, hair messy, still in pajama pants, blinking against the light. "What's going on?" he mumbled. Dad gestured toward the papers. "She's saying she owns the house." Eric raised an eyebrow. "You're kidding." I turned to him. "The only reason you've had Heat Wi-Fi or Uber Eats is because I've paid for it. Every single time." His mouth opened, then shut again. Dad stepped toward me, chest rising. "This is still my house. I built this life. You don't get to take that away." "You didn't build it," I said, quiet but firm. "Mom's father did, and she gave it to me, quietly, because she knew exactly how this would go." He backed off a step. The silence stretched. Then his tone changed, softened. "You're really going to throw out your own family after everything we've done for you?" I didn't answer right away, just gathered the documents and closed the folder. "I'm not evicting family," I said. "I'm ending the abuse." Eric gave a bitter laugh. "What you think this makes you a hero?" I looked at him. "No, I'm just done letting you pretend this is yours to ruin." He didn't respond. Dad's expression darkened. His voice dropped low. "You'll regret this." I didn't flinch, just turned as I heard Danny stir on the couch behind me. She sat up, blinking, Bunny still under one arm. "Are we leaving?" she asked softly. I walked over, crouched beside her. "No," I said gently. "They are." I gave them a week, not because I had to, but because I wanted the next step to be clean. No screaming, no scrambling, no excuses. I used that time to keep gathering records. I printed copies of every transfer and labeled each folder carefully. I didn't need to argue anymore. I just needed the facts. In the evenings after Danny was asleep, I'd sit in the kitchen with the documents spread out in front of me. Megan stopped by most nights, always bringing something small, leftovers, fresh fruit, a notepad. She never asked questions. She knew I was steadying myself. One night she helped me draft the official notice. We cross-checked everything with Adam, the attorney, to make sure it was all in order. I mailed it, certified return receipt requested. Then on a quiet Monday morning, I printed a copy and posted it to the refrigerator. I came home that afternoon to find it gone. I waited until after dinner and asked Dad if he saw the envelope. He didn't look up from the kitchen table. "You really think a piece of paper changes anything?" Eric stood in the hallway, arms folded. "You're just bluffing," he said. "You won't go through with it." "I already did," I said. They didn't respond. That evening, as I tucked Danny into bed, she asked if we were moving. I told her no. I told her this house was ours and always had been. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she reached for my hand and held it while she fell asleep. The next morning, I found my father sitting on the couch with a blanket draped over his shoulders and a tissue in one hand. He was wheezing loud enough to hear from the hallway. I stood in the doorway. He didn't look up. "You need something." He sniffed and wiped at his nose. "The stress isn't good for my lungs." I waited. He didn't continue. Later that afternoon, our neighbor Val was waiting by the mailbox. She held her purse close and didn't smile. "Heard you're throwing your sick father out on the street," she said. "He told me you won't even help drive him to his appointments." I didn't say anything, just nodded once and walked past her. Inside, I found Eric in his room with the door half closed, talking into his headset. I caught enough to know he was telling some sob story about a heartless sister who was evicting her own family after everything they'd done for her. I closed the door quietly and left him to it. That night, the doorbell rang. Leah, the woman from 3 doors down, stood on the porch holding her phone. "I need to show you something," she said. She played a video, grainy but clear. It was from the hospital. My father shouting, his hand raised. The slap, my body dropping from the bed, the sound of Danny screaming. I watched without saying anything. "I work in that wing part-time," she said. "I sent this to myself before it got wiped from the internal system. I didn't know when to share it, but I figured you might need it now." I thanked her and took the phone. She just nodded and walked back toward her house. Danny was at the table coloring. I sat down beside her and told her that everything was going to be okay. She didn't look up, just kept drawing 2 figures standing in front of a house with a bright yellow sun overhead. Her quiet smile said enough. The eviction was scheduled for Friday. I set my alarm for early and laid everything out the night before clipboard documents keys. When I stepped into the hallway, I heard movement in the kitchen. Dad was already pacing. He saw the clipboard and shook his head. "You think the police are going to drag me out of my own house?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. By 9 a.m., the county deputy pulled up to the curb. He stepped out with a calm expression and a stack of paperwork. Leah stood across the street, arms folded. Val was at her window. The deputy rang the bell. Dad opened the door. "You're letting her do this to her own father," he shouted. "This is elder abuse." The deputy didn't blink. "Mr. Monroe, this is a lawful eviction. You've been served. Today is the deadline." Eric appeared behind him. His hair-uncombed hoodie zipped halfway. "You're making a mistake," he said. "No one's going to believe you." I held up the flash drive. "They already do." The deputy plugged it into his tablet, watched for a few seconds, then nodded. "That's more than enough." Dad stepped forward, but the deputy raised a hand. "Sir, if you continue to escalate, you'll be detained." Eric glared at me. "You think this is justice? This is just revenge." "No," I said. "This is the end." More neighbors had gathered by then, scattered along the sidewalk. Val finally stepped outside and shook her head. "You could have worked this out quietly. Family doesn't turn on family." I met her eyes. Family doesn't slap you in a hospital bed in front of your child. Someone across the street murmured, "Wait, what?" I turned toward the porch. "This house was left to me by my mother," I said. "My grandfather owned it. My name is on the deed. I've paid for this household, every bill, every meal, while being insulted, ignored, and hit. That ends today." My father looked around, searching for sympathy. No one spoke. He pointed toward Danny, who had just stepped outside and stood beside me, her small hand resting against my leg. "You're ruining her life," he said. Danny's voice was soft, but steady. "You hurt my mom. That's what ruined it." Dad opened his mouth, but no words came out. The deputy handed me a final form confirming possession. "Ma'am," he said, "the property is yours." Dad's shoulders dropped. Eric set his duffel on the porch. They stepped down onto the walkway past the quiet crowd. As they reached the end of the sidewalk, Dad turned back once more. "You'll regret this." I looked at him. "No," I said. "I regret not doing it sooner." Danny reached for my hand. I closed the door behind us. After the eviction, the house felt quiet, in a way it never had before. Danny seemed calmer, like she could finally take deeper breaths. The first evening alone, we made pasta and watched one of her favorite movies. Neither of us said much, but the stillness was comforting. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the windows brighter than usual. I stood at the sink washing breakfast dishes when Danny came into the kitchen holding Bunny by one ear. "Mom," she asked softly, "are Grandpa and Uncle Eric really gone?" "Yes," I said, drying my hands. "They won't live here anymore." She hugged Bunny closer, then nodded. "Okay," she said quietly, like she was trying the word out to see how it felt. I called Megan later that day. She came over right away, bringing coffee and muffins, and sat with me at the table. For the first time in weeks, there were no folders, no documents, just the two of us, and the warm aroma of freshly brewed coffee. So Megan asked gently, "How are you feeling?" "Better," I told her truthfully. "Like I can breathe again." She smiled and took a slow sip. "Good," she said. "You deserve it." I knew the calm might not last long. Dad and Eric had a way of drawing others into their drama, and sure enough, by Monday morning my phone started ringing. Neighbors called, friends texted, each conversation cautious and careful. Val was the first to reach out directly. I answered her call on the porch while Danny played quietly in the yard. Jessica Val began hesitantly. "I just wanted to check on you. We're fine," I told her simply. There was silence for a moment. Then she spoke again, quieter this time. "Your dad stopped by my place yesterday, saying you kicked him out without warning. He seemed pretty upset." "I gave him plenty of notice, Val," I replied evenly. "He knew this was coming." She paused again. "Well, I guess there's always two sides to every story," she finally said. "Just thought I'd check." "I appreciate it," I said, and hung up softly. Over the next few days, I realized Dad had been busy. More calls came. Some neighbors asked if everything was okay. Others hinted at rumors floating around. Each conversation was careful, restrained, and awkward, but none of them upset me like they would have in the past. One evening, I was putting away laundry when there was a gentle knock at the door. It was Leah. She stood quietly, hands clasped together. "Come in," I told her warmly. "Can I get you something?" She shook her head. "I won't stay long. I just wanted you to know that your dad is telling everyone he's very ill, says he has something serious with his lungs. He's asking for help." I nodded slowly. "He's told people that before," I said. "This isn't new." Leah shifted uneasily. "Well, people are listening. Eric's helping spread it online, too." "I figured," I said quietly. Leah hesitated again. "Listen, Jessica, I just want you to know you're not alone. People saw what happened, and the video I gave you, use it if you need to." I met her eyes and smiled softly. "I will. Thank you, Leah." She nodded again, then left quietly. I knew I had to face whatever Dad and Eric were stirring up. But now it felt different. I wasn't afraid anymore. So later that night, after Danny fell asleep, I made myself a cup of tea, sat at the kitchen table, and opened my laptop. Sure enough, Eric had been busy online. There were comments from his gaming community, sympathetic messages calling me heartless, a few harsh ones about family loyalty. It was surreal reading them, people who'd never met me judging my choices based solely on Eric's word. But it wasn't enough to shake me this time. Instead, I calmly uploaded Leah's video-added screenshots of payments documents and a simple, straightforward message. "This is the truth. You decide." Within minutes, comments began appearing. Some expressed shock, others apology, many just quiet support. It felt freeing, finally having everything out in the open, nothing left to hide. The next afternoon, I took Danny to the park. She ran freely through the grass, her laughter bright unburdened. I sat on a bench watching her chase after a butterfly. It was peaceful until my phone buzzed again. It was Adam, my lawyer. "Jessica," he began evenly, "your dad reached out to me directly. He's threatening to fight the eviction, claiming elder abuse and wrongful possession of property." I exhaled slowly. "Is there anything legitimate in his claim?" "No." Adam reassured me calmly. We've documented everything thoroughly. He doesn't have a case. But I wanted you to be prepared. I nodded, even though he couldn't see it. I'm ready. Whatever we have to do, we'll handle it together, he said, voice steady. Just stay calm. That evening after dinner, Danny helped me wash dishes. She stood on her step stool, carefully rinsing plates. Her small face was serious, concentrating on the task. After a moment, she looked up. "Mommy," she said softly, "are you okay?" I paused, looking down at her. "Yes, sweetheart, I'm okay." She studied me closely. "Grandpa's mad at you." "Yes," I admitted gently, "but sometimes people get upset when you tell the truth." She tilted her head, thinking. "But we told the truth, right?" "We did," I assured her. She nodded once, satisfied, and handed me another plate. Later, after I tucked her into bed, I sat alone in the living room, listening to the quiet house settle around me. For the first time, it felt like hours not borrowed, not temporary, just peaceful. I didn't know exactly what would come next. Dad wouldn't let go easily. Eric certainly wouldn't either. But as I turned off the lights, checked the locks, and climbed into bed, I felt ready. The silence no longer felt heavy. It felt like space to finally breathe, space to stand tall, and space to quietly reclaim everything that had always belonged to us. But as I drifted into sleep, the soft buzz of my phone reminded me this wasn't over yet. A single message from an unknown number lit the screen. "We need to talk. It's important." I turned the phone face down on the bedside table. Tomorrow would bring whatever it would. For tonight, at least, the quiet belonged to us. The next morning, I woke to a second message from that same unknown number. This time, it was simpler. "Jessica, please call. It's urgent." I stared at it for a few seconds, still groggy, but something in my gut told me to pay attention. Danny was already awake, humming softly as she set the table for breakfast. Her little face was calm, focused on making things perfect. Spoons placed carefully, napkins folded into small squares. I watched her quietly for a moment, then slipped into the kitchen to make eggs. Whatever this call meant, it could wait until after breakfast. We ate quietly, the morning sunshine streaming gently through the curtains. After she'd finished and went off to brush her teeth, I stepped onto the porch and dialed the number. It rang once, twice, then a hesitant voice answered. "Jessica." "It's me." I recognized the voice immediately. It was Eric. "What do you want?" I asked evenly, keeping my voice calm. He sighed softly into the phone. "Look, I didn't want to call you. Dad made me. He's planning something. He thinks he can take the house back, says he found a lawyer who'll help." I leaned against the railing, breathing slowly. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because he's not thinking straight," Eric replied quietly. "He's angry, and he's serious." "Thanks for the warning," I said softly. He hesitated. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry." The call ended without another word. I stood there for a moment, feeling the quiet morning wrap back around me. Eric's apology lingered, but I shook it off. I had more important things to deal with. I called Adam right away. He listened carefully and assured me again we'd already done everything by the book. "Let me double-check things," he said. "Give me until this afternoon. Don't worry, Jessica. You're protected." The rest of the morning passed quietly. Danny and I played cards on the living room floor, laughing softly each time she won a round. But the heaviness of the call stayed with me, tucked quietly behind my smile. When Adam called back later, his voice was calm but serious. "Jessica, your father filed a petition. It won't stand, but it means we need to meet again. Can you come by the office tomorrow morning?" I agreed without hesitation. After hanging up, I glanced at Danny, who had moved on to coloring quietly at the coffee table. She looked so peaceful, and for a moment I wondered if I should explain any of it. Instead, I decided to let her hold on to her quiet afternoon. The next day, as I sat across from Adam, he placed several documents in front of me. His tone was gentle but firm. Your father's lawyer claims undue influence and false paperwork. They're pushing for a formal hearing. It's a desperate move, but it means you'll have to respond in court. I nodded slowly, letting it settle. What do you need from me? Adam slid a blank sheet of paper across the desk, a clear, detailed statement. Everything. Your living arrangement, your financial support, and the incidents leading to eviction. I took the paper and pen quietly. All right, I said softly. It took an hour to write it down. Each word felt heavy but necessary. Adam waited patiently, reading silently as I finished. When he looked up, his expression was reassuring. This is strong, Jessica, and remember we have video proof. Your father doesn't have that kind of evidence, but be ready, he may try to make things difficult. I thanked him and drove home slowly, windows down, letting the fresh air keep my thoughts clear. When I got home, I found Megan waiting in the driveway, a small basket in her hands. I brought sandwiches, she said simply. We sat outside eating quietly under the shade of the maple tree in the yard. After a while, Megan asked softly, Is it getting messy again? A little, I admitted, but I'm ready this time. She nodded thoughtfully. You're stronger now. I didn't respond, just smiled gently. Over the next week, the tension began to grow. Word spread fast about the upcoming hearing, and neighbors started whispering again. Dad's story shifted, growing bigger with each retelling. He told people he was robbed, betrayed, even abandoned in his moment of need. Eric stayed quiet. I didn't hear from him again, and part of me wondered if he regretted his warning. Finally, the day before the hearing arrived. The morning was clear and bright, but my nerves felt tight and restless. Danny sensed it too, glancing up from her cereal bowl at breakfast. Mommy, she said carefully, is Grandpa still mad? He is, I told her gently, but it's going to be okay. She considered this for a moment, then nodded softly. Can Bunny come to school with me today? Of course, I smiled. After dropping her off, I spent the afternoon sorting through documents, reviewing Adam's notes, checking each file again. I felt calm and focused, but my heart skipped slightly when the phone buzzed again. This time it was Leah. Jessica, she said, her voice hesitant. Your dad is here outside your house. He's knocking on your door. I felt a cold tightness in my chest, but kept my voice steady. Stay inside, Leah. I'll handle it. When I pulled into the driveway, he was sitting on the front steps, his shoulders slumped, hands clasped in his lap. He looked smaller, somehow older. He stood as I approached, his expression softer than I'd seen in years. Jessica, he began quietly. I want to talk. About what I asked, keeping my voice even. About stopping this nonsense, he said, almost pleading. We're family. I know, I said simply. That's why this is so hard. He stared at the ground, shaking his head slowly. I'm sorry. All right, isn't that enough? I looked at him carefully, seeing the tired lines around his eyes. It's not about apologies anymore, I said gently. It's about trust. His face hardened again, the softness slipping away. I built our lives, Jessica. I gave you everything. You gave conditions, I replied softly. He didn't respond, just stood quietly for a moment before turning away. You'll regret pushing this, he said finally, his voice flat. I watched him walk slowly down the street, shoulders hunched, not looking back. As he disappeared around the corner, I felt the quiet return, but deep down I knew the hardest part was still ahead. The hearing was tomorrow, and whatever happened next would finally settle everything between us. The morning of the hearing was clear and bright, the kind of day that promised peace but carried tension underneath. I dropped Danny off at school, watching her disappear happily into the crowd of backpacks and laughter, grateful she was sheltered from what lay ahead. When I arrived at the courthouse, Adam was already waiting for me by the steps. He gave a gentle nod, guiding me inside without a word. As we entered the small wood-paneled courtroom, I saw Dad and Eric sitting on the opposite side, quietly talking with their lawyer. Dad glanced up briefly, his eyes meeting mine for a second, before looking away. Eric kept his head down, silent and withdrawn. We settled in the quiet murmur of voices around us, slowly fading as the judge entered. The formalities passed quickly, and soon Adam stood to speak. "Your Honor," he began calmly, "Ms. Monroe holds clear documented title to the property in question. The eviction notice was legally served and fully justified based on a documented history of financial and emotional abuse." Dad's lawyer rose quickly in response. "We dispute these allegations, Your Honor. Mr. Monroe has suffered greatly due to his daughter's false claims and undue actions. She is attempting to wrongfully remove her father and brother from their longtime family home." The judge nodded slowly, his expression neutral. "Let's proceed with the evidence," he said simply. Adam handed him a folder, carefully laying out each document we'd collected. The deed bank statements, utility records, rent payments, all in clear order. The judge reviewed each item carefully, occasionally glancing up at us as the room remained quiet. Then Adam played Leah's video. The small courtroom filled with the stark, echoing sounds of that hospital room, Dad's angry voice, the sharp slap, and then the piercing cry from Danny. I saw Dad shift uncomfortably, glancing away. Eric's gaze stayed fixed on his folded hands. When the video ended, Adam spoke quietly but firmly. "Your Honor, this clearly demonstrates why the eviction was necessary beyond property rights alone." The judge turned toward my father's attorney. "Do you have anything to dispute this evidence?" Dad's lawyer hesitated, leaning in to whisper briefly with Dad before standing again. "Mr. Monroe acknowledges there was a dispute. However, he maintains his daughter's reaction was exaggerated and manipulated for personal gain." I felt Adam tense slightly next to me, but his voice remained calm when he replied, "We stand by the evidence presented, Your Honor." The judge paused for a moment, then spoke clearly and evenly. "I've reviewed everything carefully. Ms. Monroe's ownership of the property is beyond dispute, and the eviction is legally sound. Furthermore, the video evidence clearly demonstrates emotional and physical misconduct toward Ms. Monroe and her child." Dad's shoulders dropped visibly as the judge continued. "Therefore, the eviction stands. Mr. Monroe, you and your son have no legal claim to the residence." The judge's gavel tapped lightly, and the courtroom released its held breath. Dad's lawyer spoke quietly to him as they gathered their papers. Eric stayed silent, barely acknowledging their lawyer's attempts to speak with him. Dad stood slowly, refusing to meet my eyes. Outside the courtroom, Adam shook my hand gently. "It's over now, Jessica," he said. "You did well." I thanked him softly, feeling a quiet relief begin to spread through me, but it didn't last long. Dad was waiting near the courthouse steps, leaning against a railing as if he'd aged another decade in that single morning. As I approached, he straightened and spoke in a low voice. "Jessica, are you happy now?" I looked at him calmly. "This wasn't about happiness, Dad." He shook his head slightly, eyes tired but hard. "What will you tell Danny when she asks why her grandfather isn't around?" I held his gaze without blinking. "I'll tell her the truth." He sighed, looking away, shoulders sagging. "I suppose you've won. Enjoy your house." He turned slowly, walking away down the sidewalk, without another glance back. Eric lingered a moment longer, hesitating awkwardly. When he finally met my eyes, his voice was quiet. "I meant what I said before. I'm sorry," he murmured. I nodded gently. "I know." He gave a slight wave and walked away to catch up with Dad, leaving me alone on the courthouse steps, sunlight warm on my face. It felt as though something heavy had lifted, though I knew the emotional weight would linger a little longer. Megan was waiting at my house when I returned a warm casserole dish balanced on her hip. She smiled gently, offering a quick, comforting hug as I stepped through the door. "How'd it go?" she asked softly. "It's done," I said quietly. "The judge confirmed everything. It's finally over." She squeezed my shoulder lightly. "Come on," she said, guiding me toward the kitchen. "You could use a hot meal." We sat at the table, the warm scent of the casserole slowly filling the kitchen, bringing comfort and quiet peace. Megan stayed until Danny got home, making sure we had a gentle, easy evening ahead of us. Later, after Danny had gone to bed, I sat alone on the porch steps, listening to the quiet hum of crickets in the darkness. The cool night air brushed against my skin, carrying the soft scent of grass and distant flowers. I didn't know exactly what tomorrow would feel like, but tonight, at least, there was peace. I knew challenges might still lie ahead, that my father's bitterness wouldn't fade easily, and Eric would continue to struggle quietly with his own regrets. But tonight was different. Tonight belonged to us, to me and Danny, in the house my mother had intended for us all along. Just as I turned to go back inside, my phone buzzed softly again. The message was simple, short, but it made my heart pause for just a moment. It was from Eric. "Dad's not letting this go. Just wanted you to know." I took a slow breath, letting it out softly into the quiet night. Tomorrow could wait until tomorrow. Tonight, I would hold on to the quiet while it lasted. The message from Eric stayed on my phone for days. I didn't answer it. Not out of anger, just a quiet choice to move forward. There was nothing left for me in that conversation. I had said what needed saying. The rest was his to carry. 2 weeks after the hearing, I sold the house. It wasn't a dramatic decision. I didn't list it publicly or hang a sign out front. I called a small local firm, signed the papers quietly, and watched the process unfold from a distance. The house had served its purpose, but the walls still held too many echoes. I didn't want Danny growing up with those shadows. She needed her own beginning. So did I. We moved into a small rental cottage across town, 2 bedrooms, a narrow porch, and lavender bushes growing out front. It wasn't flashy, but it felt right. Danny picked her bedroom right away, the one where the morning sun hit first. She said Bunny liked waking up with the light. I let her choose the paint color soft sky blue. We painted it together on a Saturday, her hands streaked with color, her laughter echoing in a room that finally belonged to her. At night, she slept soundly. No more flinching at shadows. No more waking up crying. Just peace. The kind I didn't realize we were missing until it was finally ours. I started therapy, quiet, slow work, saying things I'd never said out loud, peeling back years of guilt I didn't even know I was carrying. It wasn't easy, but it was real. Each week I left the office feeling a little lighter, like I'd stopped dragging something invisible behind me. Megan still came by often, usually with coffee or pie. Sometimes we talked, sometimes we didn't. She knew when silence was enough. One afternoon I stood at the kitchen counter while Danny painted at the table. She looked up, her hands messy with green and yellow, and said, "Mommy, do you think Bunny's proud of us?" I smiled without thinking. "I think Bunny always knew we'd be okay," I said. She nodded once, then went back to her painting content. We weren't perfect. Some days were quiet, others were heavy, but they were ours. I kept a copy of the deed tucked into a folder in my closet, not because I needed proof anymore, but because it reminded me that strength can take different forms. Sometimes it's loud. Sometimes it's just saying no and meaning it. Looking back, I don't regret any of it. I'm proud of the line I finally drew, proud that I didn't let Danny grow up believing silence is the price of love. She'll know that home isn't a place where you're afraid to breathe. It's where you feel safe enough to grow. If you've listened all the way through, thank you. And if any part of this story felt familiar, if you've ever had to reclaim your space, your voice, or your peace, I hope you know you're not alone. We start over in quiet ways, sometimes with a single word, sometimes with a key left in someone's hand. Feel free to share where you're listening from, or just let me know if you're starting fresh too. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, you know where to find me. Thanks for being here. Truly,